The dog listens to its owner and rushes to execute its commands. The horse listens and remains motionless. One reacts instantly, the other deliberates before responding. Many observers interpret this as the dog being obedient and the horse being stubborn. However, that's not entirely accurate. The horse doesn't disregard, it observes. While the dog strives to please, the horse endeavors to ascertain if your request is logical. It only moves when it feels secure. And that's where many people err, conflating fear with disobedience and confusing trust with control. Picture the scene. You are at the center of a riding arena. On one side, a dog barks, leaps, and circles, awaiting your slightest gesture. On the other, a horse observes you from a distance, its head subtly tilted, ears pricked in your direction, yet its hooves remain firmly planted on the ground. You call both. The dog rushes over instantly, tongue lolling, eyes fixed on you as if nothing else in the world mattered. The horse blinks slowly, twitches an ear backward, but remains stationary. It doesn't ignore you. It is contemplating, it is assessing, it is deciphering the rhythm of your breath, the tension in your shoulders, the precise cadence of your voice. And only then, if everything appears safe, might it approach or not. For many, this disparity proves vexing. Dogs comply, horses resist. Yet, here lies an untold truth. The horse is not obstinate, it is circumspect. This fundamental distinction reconfigures one's entire paradigm concerning trust, compliance, and interspecies rapport. For centuries, we have been indoctrinated with the notion that subservience signifies intelligence, that the ideal animal responds with alacrity, without querying, devoid of hesitation. But does this premise hold true? Or are we, perhaps, erroneously evaluating two profoundly divergent worlds with an identical metric? The canine species has been sculpted by 15 millennia of cohabitation with humanity. It evolved symbiotically, genetically selected to appease us, to respond to our vocal cues, to actively seek our approbation. The equine, however, possesses an altogether distinct evolutionary narrative. It spent eons as a prey animal. Its survival was never predicated upon propitiating others. Rather, it hinged on discerning subtle cues, anticipating imminent perils, and making split-second decisions regarding flight or steadfastness. Thus, when you summon a horse and it does not immediately approach, it is not an act of defiance or disregard. It is, instead, meticulously performing the very assessment its ancestors undertook for millennia, evaluating whether your summons portends security or potential jeopardy. Here's what few truly grasp. When a horse hesitates, it's not displaying rebellion, it's demonstrating intelligence. It's leveraging millions of years of instinct to ascertain your trustworthiness. And what's truly captivating? It's unfailingly accurate. If you're anxious, it senses it. If you're feigning composure, it discerns it. If you harbor concealed anger, it detects it through your scent, your heart rate, the subtle tension in your muscles. The horse serves as a living truth detector. And when it finally chooses to follow you, it's not because you issued the correct command. It's because you have ultimately become the right person. Stay with me until the end, for I'm about to reveal something that very few people apprehend, and which has the potential to fundamentally transform your interactions with horses indefinitely. What you are on the cusp of discovering will utterly overturn everything you thought you knew about what it truly means to be obeyed by an animal. For a considerable period, it was widely believed that horses needed to be taught obedience, that they should be trained akin to dogs, through command, repetition, and reward. However, unlike canines, horses were not inherently predisposed to following directives. Their innate purpose was survival. And survival, within their natural paradigm, was never predicated on appeasement. It revolved around acutely interpreting their surroundings, sensing imminent peril, and making split-second decisions to either stand their ground or bolt. Dogs were domesticated with the primary aim of cooperation. Horses, conversely, were domesticated for labor. Yet, prior to this, before their roles as draft animals or mounts, they endured millions of years on vast open plains as prey, constantly pursued and meticulously observed by predators, patiently awaiting the opportune moment to strike. Consequently, they developed an attribute unparalleled in its intensity among other domesticated animals: the acute ability to discern intentions even before an action is initiated. When confronted with coercion, shouting, or forceful imposition, A horse does not interpret this as a directive. Instead, it perceives it as a genuine threat. And rather than complying, they instinctively resort to self-preservation. The perceived disobedience is not an act of obstinacy. It is, rather, their physical manifestation of, "I have yet to place my trust in you." And herein lies the fundamental distinction that alters the entire dynamic. Consider this. A dog yearns for your approval. It solicits affection, a raised voice of praise, a commendatory word, a pat on the head. It has been bred for this very purpose, to desire your proximity, to feel a sense of well-being when you are content with it. A horse, however, it does not seek approval. It seeks equanimity. It meticulously gauges the timbre of your voice, the cadence of your gait, the rhythm of your respiration. Should you approach with an air of tension, it becomes instantly vigilant. Conversely, a serene demeanor on your part induces its relaxation. It is not predicated on your verbal utterances. Rather, it hinges upon the subtle energy you emanate. Consequently, a straightforward command may prove entirely efficacious on one occasion and utterly ineffective on another. It transcends mere technique. It is neither contingent upon the precise movement nor the exact verbal cue. It is fundamentally about the emotional state you inhabit at the moment of your request. A horse is acutely perceptive of whether you are imbued with haste, ire, trepidation, or uncertainty, and each distinct emotion invariably alters the nature of its response. It is not engaging in defiance. Rather, it is reacting to the inherent truth you are unconsciously broadcasting. Now compare this with the dog again. You might be nervous, rushed, even irate, and the dog will still obey you. It might even hang its head low, with its tail between its legs. But it will. Because for it, obedience takes precedence over assessing your safety. But the horse? It won't move until it perceives it's safe to do so. It doesn't obey out of blind loyalty. It cooperates when it trusts you know what you're doing. When it's confident you won't put it in harm's way. And here lies the mistake most people make. They assume the horse should automatically trust them, simply because they are human, simply because they are the owner, simply because they are in charge. But trust doesn't operate that way. Not for a horse. For it, trust is something you earn. With every interaction, with every movement, with every breath. And if you falter even once, if you mislead with your body language, if you exert force when you should exercise patience, it will remember. And the next time, it will hesitate even more. Here's the truth no one wants to hear. The horse isn't at fault when it fails to obey. It is you who has yet to learn its language. You're still attempting to dictate when you ought to be inviting. You're still striving for control when you should be fostering a sense of security. And until you grasp this, as long as you persist in believing the fault lies with the horse, nothing will fundamentally change. However, when you eventually recognize that the horse isn't defying you, but is simply awaiting the assurance that it can place its trust in you, everything shifts. For at that point, you cease to impose and begin to observe. You cease shouting and begin to breathe. You cease to demand obedience and begin to earn trust. And this is precisely what we will delve into now. The origins of this profound disparity between these two creatures, and why comprehending this can irrevocably alter the way you forge connections with horses. The dog and the horse are not merely different animals. They stem from entirely contrasting evolutionary trajectories. The dog descends from the wolf, a social predator that hunted in packs. Over millennia, it honed its ability to cooperate, to follow a leader, and to function as part of a team. When humans initiated its domestication, approximately 15,000 years ago, this social structure was already firmly established. All we needed to do was integrate ourselves into this existing hierarchy. The dog accepted us as members of its pack. And across generations, we progressively selected dogs that most appealed to us, those most docile, most compliant, most loyal. We cultivated entire breeds predicated on their capacity to follow commands, anticipate our desires, and serve our needs. The modern dog, consequently, carries within its DNA an intrinsic need to belong, to please, and to cooperate. It does not question, it simply responds, because it was inherently fashioned for this purpose. The horse, however, followed a radically divergent path. It does not descend from predators, it descends from prey. And prey do not adhere to leaders out of loyalty. They do so for survival. In the ancient plains, where the first horses grazed, there was no room for blind trust. Every movement could be its last. Every unfamiliar sound could signify a feline concealed in the tall grass. Every shadow could herald approaching doom. Thus, the horse evolved an extraordinary capacity, the ability to process sensory input with unparalleled rapidity and make split-second decisions predicated on safety protocols. It learned to discern the whispers of the wind, to sense ground tremors, and to detect subtle shifts in the demeanor of its equine companions. And paramountly, it learned never, under any circumstances, to disregard its instinct. For prey, to ignore such primal urges is to court death. When mankind embarked upon the domestication of horses, approximately 6 millennia ago, it was not driven by a desire for companionship. It was rather to harness their strength, speed, and endurance. The horse was tamed, not domesticated in the emotional or affective sense. It learned to tolerate human presence and to cooperate in tasks, yet it never relinquished that primal instinct to critically assess every unfolding situation before taking action. It never ceased to be, fundamentally, a creature of prey. And here lies the pivotal distinction. When you interact with a dog, you are engaging with a social predator eager to integrate into your pack. Conversely, when you interact with a horse, you are engaging with a prey animal that is perpetually assessing whether you pose a threat or ensure safety. These represent two entirely divergent psychological realities. The dog perceives you and instinctively thinks, "You are my leader, I shall follow your lead." The horse observes you and contemplates, "Are you trustworthy? Can I afford to lower my guard in your presence? Will I survive if I comply with your requests?" This distinction is not trivial, it is foundational. It elucidates why methodologies that prove perfectly effective with canines utterly fail with equines. You cannot admonish a horse vocally and anticipate obedience stemming from hierarchical deference. To a horse, a shout signifies the sound of a predator. You cannot physically compel it and expect learning to occur. To a horse, coercion is an assault. You cannot rush it and anticipate trust. For a horse, haste signals panic. Every action you undertake is filtered through this ingrained ancestral survival instinct. And if you fail to grasp this fundamental aspect, you will spend a lifetime perceiving horses as obstinate, when in truth, they are merely embodying precisely what they have always been: vigilant, circumspect, and intelligent. Thus, when someone asserts that a horse must learn to obey, what that individual is truly articulating is, the horse must override millions of years of evolution and act contrary to its innate instincts simply to placate me. But this is not training. It constitutes a subversion of its intrinsic nature. And do you comprehend the repercussions when an animal is compelled to repudiate its fundamental nature? It shatters, it withdraws, it invariably develops vices, profound anxieties, or lasting traumas, or it erupts. For while instinct can be temporarily suppressed, it can never be truly extinguished. It invariably resurfaces, and when it returns, it does so with potent intensity. Now, envision a divergent approach. Imagine operating in concert with the horse's inherent disposition, rather than in opposition to it. Envision comprehending that when it hesitates, it's not born of obstinacy, but rather because it is precisely executing its fundamental imperative. Evaluating the safety of its environment, and conceive of a scenario where, instead of compelling it to disregard this instinct, you simply demonstrate its safety, that you are predictable, that you embody tranquility, that you pose no threat. When this paradigm shift occurs, something truly remarkable transpires. The horse does not merely obey, it consciously chooses to cooperate, and this profound choice fundamentally alters everything. Anyone who interacts with horses knows this intimately. They perceive everything, even what you attempt to conceal. If you arrive at the stable after a taxing day, fraught with pent-up anger and accumulated frustration, the horse senses it. You might smile, speak softly, and perform all the correct movements, yet it will detect the tension in your shoulders, the rigidity in your jaw, and the erratic rhythm of your breathing, and it will react to that, not to your words, nor to the commands you issue, but to the genuine emotional state you carry. This isn't mysticism, it's biology. Horses possess an exquisitely sensitive nervous system, honed to detect predators from afar. They sense subtle variations in your heart rate as you approach. They pick up on pheromones released by your body when you are anxious or fearful. They discern micro-expressions on your face, subtle shifts in your posture, and hesitations in your gestures. To them, you are an open book, and they read every page in real time. constantly assessing whether you pose a threat or offer safety. Hence, the very same exercise might perform flawlessly one day and utterly fail the next. Neither the technique nor the command shifted. You did. You arrived in a different state. Perhaps you were rushed, preoccupied, or mentally disengaged, and the horse discerned it. He isn't being recalcitrant. He is merely responding to the emotional cues you are unconsciously transmitting. Now, contrast this with a canine. You might be agitated, distracted, or even irate, yet the dog will steadfastly follow, obey, and even attempt to console you. Because for the canine, the bond with you transcends any transient emotional state. It overlooks your inconsistencies and readily adapts to your shifting temperaments. However, equines do not operate similarly. For them, consistency is paramount. Should you waver, so too will he. Should you exhibit emotional instability, he will likewise become unsettled, not out of obstinacy, but as a primal survival reflex. He is mirroring you. And this mirroring is, in fact, a profound gift, a form of deep communication that few humans pause to truly comprehend. There is a renowned instance of a 6-year-old child who could ride a horse deemed perilous, whereas seasoned adults dared not even come close. Experienced handlers would attempt, employing all their technique and leveraging years of experience, only for the horse to retreat, rear up, and bare its teeth. Yet, when the child approached, calmly, curiously, devoid of expectations, and free from tension, the horse would lower its head and permit her to mount. Why? Because the child harbored no ego. She was in no rush. She sought to prove nothing. She was simply present, unburdened, and genuine. And the horse sensed this. It perceived no threat, no coercive control, no ulterior motive, only pure presence. And it responded accordingly. This exemplifies the kind of emotional intelligence that horses possess, and which most adult humans have forfeited. We invariably complicate matters with expectations, with pride, with the compulsion to exert control, and the horse perceives every stratum of this complexity and consequently recoils. Another instance involved a man working with a rescued horse, deeply traumatized by years of maltreatment. Nothing proved effective, no technique, no methodology. No gentle overture seemed to penetrate its defenses. The horse would simply withdraw into itself, remaining motionless, its eyes vacant, as if it had entirely surrendered to despair. Until one day, the man received devastating news. He had lost someone profoundly significant to him. He went to the stable, not with the intention of training, but because he craved solitude. He sat down on the paddock floor and began to weep, and for the first time in months, the horse stirred. Slowly, deliberately, it drew closer. It positioned itself beside the man. It gently lowered its head, and it remained there, simply breathing in unison. In that profound moment, there was no command, no technique, no assertion of control. There was only raw truth, unmasked human vulnerability, and the horse perceived that as safe, as authentic, because for the first time, that human wasn't striving to project strength, wasn't feigning composure, wasn't attempting to assert dominance. He was simply being authentically human, and that, to the horse, was inherently trustworthy. This narrative illuminates a profound truth. Horses do not merely react to your actions, they respond to your very essence. One might master every exercise, every training regimen, every implement. However, if your internal state is fraught with conflict, if you are dissembling, if there is concealed anger or trepidation, the horse will invariably perceive it. Consequently, it will withhold cooperation, not out of obstinacy, but as a self-preservation mechanism against your emotional volatility. This is precisely where the vast majority of people go profoundly wrong. They approach horses as if they were merely oversized dogs. They assume that simple repetition of a command, the allure of a carrot, and the deployment of a firm tone will suffice to secure obedience. However, this methodology proves ineffectual. For the equine is not primarily driven by reward. Its paramount concern is security. It cares little for your provisioning capabilities. It seeks to establish your trustworthiness. And trust, for a horse, is unequivocally fostered by unwavering consistency, a tranquil disposition, and lucid communication, not through sheer volume, coercive force, or relentless insistence. Hence, numerous conventional methodologies are doomed to failure. They endeavor to subjugate the animal's will, compelling compliance through unremitting pressure. And what, then, is the inevitable outcome? The horse retreats into itself, its trust erodes, it comes to react purely from a place of apprehension rather than volition. And in such circumstances, the genuine bond inevitably withers. One might acquire an equine that adheres to directives, yet one will not have cultivated a horse that places its trust in you. And a monumental chasm separates these two realities. An equine yielding to fear will invariably erupt into flight at the initial indication of genuine danger. Conversely, a horse that trusts you will instinctively seek your direction, even when confronted with profound disorder. Consider a trainer who employs spurs, a whip, and a raised voice. Such a trainer can certainly compel the horse to move, to obey. Internally, however, the horse is internalizing that humans signify pain, pressure, and threat. It complies, certainly, but out of fear of repercussions, and fear, fundamentally, is a precarious foundation. This approach remains effective only until the horse's apprehension of the requested action eclipses its fear of retribution. On that pivotal day, the entire structure disintegrates. The horse might rear, bolt, or even strike. And the trainer, witnessing this insubui, exclaims, "See, it's dangerous, it's dominant, it needs to be controlled with even greater force." Yet, the inherent issue was never the horse itself. It resided solely in the methodology, an endeavor to coerce obedience rather than cultivate trust. Now, contrast this with an alternative approach, that of a trainer who approaches gradually, patiently allowing the horse time to process, and who rewards the slightest indication of cooperation, not with sustenance, but with the alleviation of pressure, with ample space, and with timely pauses. Such a horse assimilates a profoundly different lesson. It comprehends that humans are predictable, rational, and pose no inherent threat. Consequently, having absorbed this understanding, it requires no coercion. Instead, it willingly opts for cooperation. But here lies the hidden conflict that no one discusses. Most people are unwilling to concede that the problem originates with them. It's simpler to attribute blame to the horse, to assert that it is stubborn, challenging, or possesses a strong temperament, because acknowledging that one is being read, evaluated, and deemed inadequate by an animal wounds the ego. It's painful to recognize that you are not as composed as you perceive yourself to be, not as in command as you desire, nor as emotionally balanced as you imagine. The horse compels you to confront your own shadows. It reveals, without words, where you are deluding yourself. And most individuals cannot endure this degree of honesty. Consequently, they project onto the horse, ascribing to it the blame for communication breakdown, and persist in employing the same ineffectual methods while anticipating divergent outcomes. This constitutes sheer folly. Yet, this is precisely what transpires in thousands of stables worldwide on a daily basis. Another insidious, yet devastating error lies in trying to expedite trust. You crave swift results. You expect the horse to place its confidence in you immediately, without delay, at this very instant. But trust doesn't operate on your timeline. It functions on its own. Each horse possesses its own unique processing rhythm, its individual history, and its specific traumas. A horse that has endured mistreatment will require months, perhaps even years, to completely let down its guard. And should you attempt to force this process, if impatience sets in, if you begin to exert pressure, convinced you've already invested sufficient effort, the horse will perceive it and recoil. For to a horse, haste is a harbinger of a predator. Predators are inherently hurried. They strike with celerity. Thus, when you rush, when you exhibit an eagerness for outcomes, the horse construes this as a threat, and all that you have painstakingly established up to that moment unravels. Herein lies the snare. You perceive yourself as being resolute, assertive, and exhibiting leadership. Yet the horse interprets this as thinly veiled aggression, and it reacts as it always has, by withdrawing, safeguarding itself, and becoming reclusive. And you, in your frustration, conclude that the equine is the root of the issue, whereas in truth, the core issue has consistently been your incapacity to decelerate, to honor its timeline, and to grasp that trust cannot be demanded. Rather, trust is painstakingly forged, brick by painstaking brick, breath by deliberate breath, and any endeavor to accelerate this organic process merely obliterates what has already been painstakingly constructed. Here, then, is the transformative revelation. In the realm of equines, trust is not something commanded, it is earned through presence. Upon approaching a horse, it performs a comprehensive assessment of your being. It perceives whether you are fully present or distracted, tranquil or anxious, authentic or disingenuous. Based on this assessment, it makes a critical determination whether you embody safety. Should it ascertain your safety, it will then choose to follow you, not because you commanded it, but because it made a deliberate choice. This choice is sacrosanct. It forms the bedrock of all potential interaction between human and equine. It cannot be coerced, purchased, or feigned. One is either trustworthy or not, and the horse unfailingly discerns the distinction. Consequently, when encountering a non-responsive horse, pause and introspect. Does the issue reside with the animal or with me? Am I communicating with clarity or confusion? Am I genuinely serene, or merely attempting to project calmness? For that subtle distinction, however seemingly insignificant, constitutes everything to the horse. And when this realization finally dawns upon you, when you cease attempting to control and simply begin to be authentic, something extraordinary unfolds. The horse relaxes, it lowers its head, it takes a step in your direction, and in that profound moment, you comprehend that you have earned something no command could ever procure: the genuine trust of an animal that has spent millions of years learning the imperative of trusting nothing. Here's what this truly entails in practice. Trust, for the horse, is not an abstract sentiment. It's a constant assessment, renewed with every interaction. It doesn't trust you once and for all. It trusts you now, in this very moment, based on your current state. And if you change, if you lose your composure, if you exert force when you should exercise patience, if your body language belies your true intent, it perceives it. And trust recedes, not because it is resentful, but because it is inherently honest. It doesn't feign trust when it doesn't feel it. It doesn't pretend that all is well when it is not. It simply reflects the unvarnished truth of the situation. And this brutal honesty is what renders the horse one of the most profound teachers a human can encounter. For it imparts a lesson few humans can: the distinction between appearing trustworthy and genuinely being trustworthy, between merely speaking of calmness and embodying it, between controlling and leading. And once you finally grasp this distinction, once you truly integrate this truth into your very being, your physicality, your breath, your presence, the horse discerns it, and it responds accordingly, not with coerced obedience, but with genuine cooperation. And this cooperation far surpasses 1,000 commands yielded to out of fear. There's an old adage among seasoned equestrians that encapsulates it all. The horse is a mirror. It mirrors precisely what you are radiating. If you are agitated, it becomes defensive. If you are fearful, it becomes skittish. If you are at peace, it relaxes. It does not judge. It simply responds to the energy you bring forth. And herein lies the truth, simultaneously most liberating and most frightening. For it signifies that every time you fail to forge a connection with an equine, every time it remains unresponsive, every time it shies away, it is not because it is recalcitrant. It is rather that you are not yet embodying the person it needs you to be. And upon accepting this accountability, when you desist from faulting the horse and begin to work on yourself, everything transforms. You cease attempting to dominate and begin to become truly trustworthy. And subsequently, the horse finally yields to your leadership, not out of necessity, but because it desires to, for it has at last discovered in you a rarity, a human devoid of deceit. So, the next time someone claims horses are stubborn, you will know the truth. They are not stubborn, they are honest. They do not dissemble about their emotions, nor do they feign trust when it is absent, and they certainly do not comply merely to ingratiate themselves. Instead, they await the moment when every fiber of their being signals, "It is now safe." And when they finally assent, when they ultimately align themselves with your direction, it is not an act of submission. It is, unequivocally, trust. And that holds greater value than 1,000 commands executed out of apprehension. The canine responds to vocal cues. The equine, however, responds to veracity. And when a horse elects to follow you, it is not due to coercion, nor manipulation, nor superior strength on your part. It is, rather, because you have conclusively demonstrated that your presence signifies safety, that you are predictable, that you are authentic, that you pose no intrinsic threat. And this constitutes the most profound expression of deference an animal can bestow upon you. It is a deliberate choice to relinquish vigilance, to repose confidence, and to engage in cooperation. And when you attain this profound bond, you do not merely acquire an obedient horse, you gain a true partner, an ally who will accompany you not from apprehension, but from volition. And this fundamental distinction alters everything, irrevocably. We invite you to share in the comments. Have you ever experienced a moment where you perceived that the horse was reading you, not merely the command? What truly shifted when you made the initial adjustment? Perhaps it was a deeper breath, a more deliberate stride, a pivotal moment when you finally ceased attempting to control and simply existed in the present. Such instances are rare and immensely precious, and once they transpire, they are never forgotten. For it is then that you discern that a genuine connection with a horse is not forged through technical mastery, but through profound authenticity. Subscribe to the channel if you wish to continue deciphering this unspoken language that few truly master, this dialogue between human and equine that unfolds without words, constructed through presence, through breath, through unadulterated honesty. For ultimately, working with horses is not about instructing them to obey you. It is about you learning